Alone on the plains, a mother, her son, and the kind rancher. The sun had barely begun to rise over the endless plains, but Clara was already awake. She had learned long ago that the early hours were the hardest and the most necessary for survival. The wind was cold, sharper than a knife, and it cut through the thin layers she had wrapped around herself. Beside her, her son Ethan stirred, rubbing his eyes and letting out a small, tired yawn. He was only 7, but the plains had aged him in ways she could see in the lines around his mouth and the serious expression that had replaced his once playful smile. Clara watched him for a moment, a pang of sorrow tightening her chest. She had tried to shield him from the harshness of their world, but the truth was impossible to hide. They had been alone for weeks, traveling from one abandoned cabin to another, searching for food and safety, trying to keep moving forward in a land that seemed to stretch endlessly, without a single town in sight. Every step they took was heavy with uncertainty. Every sound of the wind through the tall grasses made her heart race. "Mom?" Ethan's small voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart," she answered softly, bending down to brush the dust from his hair. "I'm hungry," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara felt a knot in her stomach tighten. She had known this day would come. She had rationed the little food they had, some dried meat, a few biscuits that had lasted longer than she expected. But now it was gone. The thought of him hungry made her own stomach twist. "I know, Ethan. I know," she said, forcing a calm she did not feel. "We'll find something today." They had been walking since before dawn, following the faint trail of an old wagon path that Clara remembered her husband once showing her on a map. He had died 2 years earlier, leaving her to care for Ethan alone. She remembered his voice, strong and reassuring, telling her that she could do this, that she was stronger than she believed. Sometimes she whispered his words to herself to keep from giving in to despair. The plains were wide and open, the kind of landscape that could be beautiful in its emptiness, but to Clara, it was dangerous. There were no trees to provide shelter, no streams with certain water, no villages with people who might help. The grass was tall and dry, cracking under her feet as she walked, and she kept a constant watch for any signs of wildlife that could threaten them, or worse, show that food might be nearby but already claimed by someone else. Ethan clutched a small cloth bundle he carried with a few meager possessions. He had taken to holding it tightly against his chest, as though it were a shield against the world. Clara had tried to explain that it was good to keep hope close, and in some ways this small bundle was all they had left of their old life. Inside were a few small clothes, a locket that had belonged to his father, and a worn toy horse that had seen better days. It was his treasure, and he would not let it go. "Mom, do you think we'll see anyone today?" he asked. His voice held a mixture of curiosity and fear. Clara paused, looking out at the horizon. The sky was a pale blue, the sun rising slowly and painting the grass in golden light. There was nothing in sight, only the rolling plains that seemed to go on forever. "I don't know, Ethan," she said honestly, "but we have to keep going. Sometimes when you least expect it, someone will be there to help." He nodded, but she could see the worry in his eyes. Children were supposed to feel safe, she thought bitterly, yet here he was, facing a world where every day was a struggle. She wished she could shield him from the cold nights, from the hunger, from the loneliness. She wished she could turn back time and make things easier. But time had moved forward, and there was no turning back. All she could do was move ahead and hope. They walked in silence for hours, the sound of the wind their only companion. Clara kept a careful eye on Ethan, making sure he did not stumble on the uneven ground. Occasionally, he would stop to pick up a shiny rock or a piece of old wood, trying to find a small joy in the vast emptiness. Clara encouraged him gently, smiling when she could, even though the smile felt thin. By midday, the sun hung high in the sky, and the heat of it pressed down on them. Clara's lips were dry, her throat parched, and she could feel the exhaustion in her bones. Ethan had slowed his pace, his small legs struggling against the distance they had traveled. She stopped under the faint shadow of a small rise in the land and knelt beside him. "We need to rest for a little while," she said, pulling him close. He leaned against her, and for a moment the world felt slightly less cruel. She closed her eyes, listening to his shallow breaths. She wished for water, for food, for a safe place they could call home. But wishes did little to change the reality of the plains. After a short rest, they began moving again, the sun now high enough to burn their skin. Clara's mind wandered as she walked, thinking about her husband, about the neighbors who had disappeared over the years, about the letters she had once received from friends who had moved far away. She thought about the stories her father used to tell her as a child, of brave women who survived storms and hardships, and she drew strength from the memory. If they could survive, she told herself, so could she. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up again, stronger and colder, carrying with it the scent of distant grass fires and dust. Clara's stomach ached with hunger, and she knew Ethan's did too. She tried to hide it from him, but he looked at her with a knowing expression. Children had a way of seeing the truth, even when adults tried to mask it. "Mom, I think I see something," Ethan said suddenly, pointing toward the horizon. Clara squinted, shielding her eyes from the sun. There, faint against the sky, was a small plume of smoke. Her heart leapt. Smoke meant people. Smoke meant fire. Smoke meant warmth, food, and safety. She grabbed Ethan's hand, her energy renewed.
Yes, Ethan.
"Let's go. That might be someone we can ask for help." They began moving faster, their steps more urgent, hope coursing through their tired bodies. Clara kept her voice calm, hiding her excitement so she would not scare him. But inside, she allowed herself to imagine a meal, a bed, and a kind face waiting for them. As they drew closer, the shapes of a distant homestead became clear. A small wooden house stood among a few barns and corrals, and smoke continued to curl from the chimney. Clara slowed her pace slightly, reminding herself to be cautious. People could be kind, or they could be cruel. She had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her to approach carefully. Ethan walked beside her, clutching his bundle, wide-eyed and silent. Clara reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. "We're almost there, sweetheart. Just a little further." In that moment, the plains no longer felt endless or cruel. There was a glimmer of hope, a promise of safety just beyond the rise. Clara did not know the story of the people who lived there. She did not know if they would help or turn them away, but she knew she had to try. For Ethan, for herself, for the fragile thread of survival that had kept them alive this long. And with that, she took a deep breath, straightened her back, and stepped forward, ready to meet whatever awaited them at the homestead, her son's small hand firmly in hers. The homestead grew clearer with every step Clara and Ethan took. The house was small, made of weathered wood that had seen many storms. Smoke drifted steadily from the chimney, carrying the comforting smell of cooking. Clara's heart beat faster. For weeks they had seen nothing but endless grass and sky. The sight of another human dwelling was like discovering a small island in a vast ocean of emptiness. Ethan clutched his small bundle tightly, his knuckles white. "Do you think they'll help us, Mom?" he whispered. Clara squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I hope so, Ethan. We won't know until we try." As they approached, a man appeared on the porch. He was tall and sturdy, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a simple shirt with rolled-up sleeves. His eyes were kind, though they held a quiet watchfulness, the kind that came from years of living close to the land. He watched them carefully but did not step forward aggressively or call out. Clara noticed a gentle calm in his stance that seemed to invite trust, even though she had been taught to be cautious of strangers. Clara stopped a few feet from the edge of the yard, motioning for Ethan to stand close beside her. She spoke with a soft but firm voice. "Excuse me, sir. My name is Clara, and this is my son, Ethan. We are traveling and need a little help. We have nowhere else to go." Her voice shook slightly, betraying the fear she tried to hide. The man tipped his hat and smiled faintly. "Well, you've come a long way," he said, his voice steady and warm. "I'm Thomas. Come up to the porch. Don't be afraid. You look like you could use a hot meal." Clara hesitated for only a moment before leading Ethan forward. The boys' eyes were wide with awe as they stepped onto the porch. It was a small space, but it seemed safe, a tiny oasis amid the endless plains. Thomas motioned for them to sit on a wooden bench near the door. He disappeared inside for a moment, and the smell of fresh bread and stew drifted out to meet them. Clara's stomach tightened with hunger and relief. She had not smelled food like this in days. Thomas returned with a bowl of steaming stew and 2 slices of bread. "Here," he said kindly, placing them in front of them. "Eat as much as you need." Ethan's eyes lit up, and he began to eat with small, careful bites. Clara watched him, feeling a wave of gratitude so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. She took her own first bite and realized how hungry she truly was. The warmth of the food spread through her, and for the first time in days, she felt some measure of comfort. As they ate, Thomas leaned against the doorframe, watching them with quiet curiosity. "You've been traveling for some time, haven't you?" he asked gently. Clara nodded, swallowing hard to keep her voice steady. "We've been on the plains for weeks, trying to find something better, somewhere safe. We had no home after my husband passed. We've been moving ever since." Her words trembled, but Thomas did not interrupt. He only nodded, listening. "You've done well to keep him safe this long," Thomas said. "The plains can be cruel, and it's easy to get lost or give up hope. You're both lucky you made it this far." Clara felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of relief she had not known in weeks. Someone understood. Someone cared. She had expected suspicion, maybe even fear, but Thomas's kindness was genuine. She glanced at Ethan, who was now smiling faintly, his cheeks flushed from the warmth of the stew. After a while, Thomas suggested they come inside. The house was small but cozy, with a fireplace that filled the room with warmth and a few simple furnishings. Clara felt a rare sense of peace settle over her as she set Ethan down on a warm rug near the fire. Thomas offered them blankets and water, and Clara realized how much she had missed the simple comforts of a home. They sat together, and Thomas began to tell them a little about himself. He spoke of years spent working the land, of storms that had tested his patience, and of losses he had endured, including the death of his own family long ago. Clara listened, finding comfort in the fact that he, too, had faced hardship. It reminded her that even in the toughest of times, survival was possible. Ethan, shy at first, began to ask questions. He wanted to know about the animals on the ranch, the different tools Thomas used, and even how bread was made. Thomas answered patiently, explaining each thing in simple terms. He showed Ethan a few small chores that were safe for him, like feeding the chickens and collecting eggs. The boys' laughter returned in small bursts, a sound that made Clara's heart swell with relief. The afternoon passed quietly, filled with small tasks, conversation, and the comforting rhythm of daily life. Clara began to notice the little details that made the place feel like a home. The smell of the bread baking, the sound of chickens clucking, and the way Thomas moved through his small domain with ease. It was a stark contrast to the endless plains they had traveled for so long, where nothing felt permanent and danger lurked in every shadow. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara realized how exhausted she had been without even noticing. Thomas had prepared a small meal for the evening, and they sat together once again. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt safe enough to allow herself a deep breath. She watched Ethan's eyes grow heavy with sleep, and she felt a fierce gratitude toward Thomas. After dinner, Thomas led them to a small room upstairs. There were 2 simple beds with clean sheets and a warm quilt on each. "You'll sleep well here," he said kindly. "No need to worry tonight." Clara tucked Ethan into bed, brushing his hair back gently. "See, Ethan, everything is going to be okay," she whispered. He nodded, snuggling into the quilt, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe it. Later, as Clara lay awake, listening to the quiet crackle of the fireplace downstairs, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The plains had been relentless, testing her strength and courage every step of the way. But here, in this small home with a kind man who had shown them warmth and safety, she saw a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, she thought, they could build a new life, even if only for a while, in a place where kindness existed and survival was possible. She remembered her husband's words once again, the advice he had given her about perseverance and hope. She understood now that it wasn't just about moving forward blindly. It was about finding moments of trust, about holding on to people and places that offered safety, and about allowing oneself to accept help when it was given freely. Morning came quietly. Clara awoke to the soft sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cows, the gentle clucking of hens, and the distant whistle of the wind through the grass. She looked over at Ethan still asleep and felt a surge of determination. This small place and the kindness of a stranger had given them a chance to rest and regain their strength. She knew they would need it, for the journey ahead was far from over. As they prepared to start the day, Thomas greeted them with a smile and a fresh loaf of bread. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I hope you slept well. There's work to do if you're ready." Clara nodded, feeling a sense of purpose she had not felt in a long time. She helped Ethan with the chores, showing him how to feed the animals and gather eggs. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it brought a rhythm to their lives that the endless wandering on the plains never had. They laughed over small mistakes, shared stories, and slowly began to feel the bonds of trust and community forming between them and Thomas. By the end of the day, Clara knew that their journey had changed. They were still travelers, still survivors, but now they were not alone. There was someone who cared, someone who offered more than just food and shelter, someone who offered understanding and patience. The plains would still be harsh, and the world could still be cruel, but here, at this small homestead, they had found a refuge. And for the first time in a long while, Clara allowed herself to hope. Days passed slowly on the ranch, but for Clara and Ethan, they were the first days in a long while that felt almost like life itself instead of mere survival. Each morning, Thomas would rise early, whistle softly to the animals, and begin his work without complaint. He always made time to show Clara and Ethan small tasks, teaching them the rhythm of the land and the responsibilities of caring for both animals and home. Clara watched closely, learning how to feed the cows, milk them carefully, and carry the heavy buckets without spilling a drop. She felt a strange pride in her ability to keep up, even though her muscles ached and her hands grew rough with work. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed to grow more confident with each passing day. He loved to help Thomas feed the chickens and collect eggs. At first, he had been shy and hesitant, afraid he might do something wrong, but Thomas's gentle guidance helped him find courage. Clara often smiled to herself when she saw him laughing, a sound she had not heard in weeks. It reminded her of the boy she had known before the endless wandering, before hunger and fear had stolen so much of his childhood. The house felt warmer than any place Clara had known for a long time. It wasn't just the fire or the walls. It was the feeling of safety. She could sit with a cup of tea and watch Ethan play with a small wooden toy horse he had brought from their travels, and for a few precious hours she could pretend the world was not so harsh. Thomas would sometimes join them in the evenings, telling stories about the land, about the storms he had survived, and about the animals that lived on the plains. His voice was steady and calm, and the boy would listen, eyes wide with fascination, as if the stories were a kind of magic. One afternoon, Clara worked beside Thomas in the barn, sweeping out hay and organizing tools. The sunlight streamed through the cracks in the wooden walls, dust dancing in the golden beams. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, and felt a sense of peace she had not known in months. "Thomas," she said softly, "how do you stay so calm out here, all alone?" Thomas looked up, leaning on his broom. His eyes, steady and kind, met hers. "You get used to it," he said simply. "The land can be harsh, yes, but it also teaches you patience. You learn to respect it, to work with it, and in return, it gives you what you need. You and Ethan, you're learning that too." Clara nodded, feeling both gratitude and humility. She realized how much she had depended on her own stubbornness to survive. But now she could see the power of guidance, of learning from someone who had lived with the land for years. For the first time, she understood that surviving alone was not always the answer. Sometimes survival required trust, and trust required courage. Meanwhile, Ethan had discovered a small stream running near the edge of the property. He would run back to Clara, eyes sparkling, holding handfuls of smooth stones he had found in the water. "Look, Mom! "Look at this one," he would shout, pride in his small voice. Clara would smile, brushing the wet hair from his face. "It's beautiful, Ethan. You have a good eye." She could see that these little discoveries were helping him grow, teaching him wonder and joy again, even after so much hardship. One evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, Thomas invited them to sit on the porch. He handed each of them a warm cup of milk. The three of them watched the horizon together, the wind softly rustling the tall grass around them. Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They were still far from any town, still far from the lives they had once known, but for the first time, the future did not feel frightening. "I've been thinking," Thomas said quietly, "about how hard it must have been for you, Clara, to raise a child alone out here. It takes more strength than most people know." Clara lowered her gaze, feeling both embarrassed and touched by the compliment. "I just did what I had to do," she admitted. "I couldn't let Ethan suffer. I had to keep moving, keep hoping. Some days it felt impossible, but I kept trying." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's courage. Not the kind you hear about in stories, but the real kind. The kind that doesn't get noticed, but keeps life going." Ethan, listening quietly, leaned against his mother. Clara could feel his small body relax as he let the moment sink in. She knew that he too was learning what courage looked like, not the bravery of facing storms or wild animals, but the quiet courage of keeping hope alive, even when the world seems empty. Over the next few days, Clara began to take more initiative around the ranch. She helped Thomas mend fences, tended to the small garden, and even learned to milk the cows efficiently. Each task, no matter how simple, reminded her of her strength. She felt pride in her abilities and satisfaction in providing not just for herself and Ethan, but for the small community they were forming with Thomas. Ethan, meanwhile, became more adventurous. He learned to lead a small horse through simple exercises and even helped Thomas round up a few stray chickens. He would come running back to Clara afterward, his eyes bright, and she would hug him tightly, overwhelmed by the joy of seeing him grow confident and strong. One afternoon, while Clara worked in the garden, she overheard Thomas talking to a neighbor who had come by with supplies. They spoke quietly, but Clara could sense that Thomas was careful in everything he did. He measured his words, showing patience and thoughtfulness, not just for the work of the ranch, but for the people he cared about. Clara realized that his kindness was not casual. It was deliberate, and it made all the difference in their lives. Evenings became a time for reflection. Clara would sit by the fire with Ethan, reading the small book of stories he had brought along. Thomas often joined them, sometimes quietly, sometimes adding small observations about life on the plains. The firelight flickered on their faces, and for a while the past seemed distant. The pain of hunger, the fear of the unknown, and the endless lonely nights were softened by warmth, companionship, and trust. Clara often thought about the journey that had brought them here. The endless plains, the nights under open skies, the worry and fear, they were still part of her memory, but now those memories were tempered by hope. She realized that while the world could be harsh, there were people like Thomas, and there could be small oases of safety and kindness even in the toughest of places. One evening, as a cool wind whispered across the plains, Clara found herself talking to Thomas about her late husband. She spoke softly, her voice trembling at times, sharing memories of his laughter and the dreams they had once held. Thomas listened, never interrupting, and when she was finished, he simply said, "He would be proud of you, Clara. You've kept moving forward. You've given Ethan a life even when the world made it hard." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but this time, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief and gratitude. She realized that survival was not just about making it through the night or finding food. It was about finding people who could help you rebuild, even in small ways, and giving yourself permission to accept that help.
Ethan, sensing the mood, climbed into her lap, hugging her tightly.
Clara held him close, feeling the warmth of family, however small, and the strength that came from being together. The plains were still vast and challenging, but now they had a place to rest, to learn, and to grow stronger. As the nights passed, Clara noticed subtle changes in both herself and her son. Ethan was more confident, less anxious, and began to dream again. About the future, about adventures on the ranch, and about a life that could be happy even after hardship. Clara herself felt a renewed sense of purpose. She could teach Ethan, learn new skills, and build a life that honored her husband's memory while embracing the kindness of strangers. Thomas, watching quietly, seemed satisfied with the progress they were making. He did not need to say much. Clara and Ethan were learning from him every day, not just about the land and animals, but about patience, trust, and resilience. They were becoming part of the rhythm of the ranch, part of a small but real community, where each day brought small victories and quiet joys. By the end of part 3, Clara felt a sense of calm and hope that she had not known for months. The bond between her, Ethan, and Thomas had grown strong. They were no longer just survivors on the harsh plains. They were part of something lasting, a family in the making, connected not by blood but by kindness, trust, and the shared struggle of life. And for the first time in a long time, Clara believed that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they could face them together, stronger and braver than before. Life on the ranch had settled into a comfortable rhythm for Clara, Ethan, and Thomas. Days were filled with chores, small lessons, and quiet moments of laughter. Yet, as much as the homestead felt safe, Clara knew that the world beyond the fences could still be dangerous. The plains were unpredictable, and there were whispers of trouble drifting through the air like dry leaves in the wind. One morning, as Clara and Ethan fed the chickens, Thomas came out of the barn looking unusually serious. His brow was furrowed, and there was a tension in his voice Clara had rarely heard. "Clara, Ethan," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something. I've heard news from the neighboring ranches. There are people moving through the region. Bandits, they say. They take what they want, and they don't care about who gets hurt." Clara's stomach dropped. Her hands, which had been steady for months, trembled as she clutched a basket of eggs. "Bandits?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's small face paled, and he pressed himself against her side, seeking comfort. Thomas nodded. "Yes, it's far from us for now, but we need to be prepared. We can't be careless, not even for a moment. The plains are wide, but danger can come quickly." For the rest of the day, Clara moved through the ranch with a new awareness. Every sound of the wind, every creak of the house, and every movement in the distance made her heart race. She explained to Ethan in the gentlest terms she could find, trying to ease his fear without hiding the truth. "We're safe here for now," she said softly. "But we must be careful. We'll watch, listen, and trust Thomas. He knows the land better than anyone." Thomas, understanding her concern, began teaching Clara and Ethan strategies to stay safe. He showed them how to secure the doors and windows at night, how to spot signs of strangers approaching, and how to move quietly if they ever needed to escape. Clara listened intently, absorbing every word. For the first time, the lessons of survival felt practical, not just abstract stories of courage. Ethan was frightened at first. He had grown used to the safety of their small routine, and the idea of danger threatened the fragile sense of security he had begun to feel. But Thomas and Clara reassured him. They told him that being aware was not the same as being afraid, and that courage often meant being careful and patient. Slowly, the boy began to understand. Even as the threat of bandits hung in the back of their minds, life on the ranch continued. Clara and Thomas repaired a broken fence together, teaching Ethan how to drive stakes into the ground and secure wire. They worked under the bright sun, their hands calloused, their muscles aching, yet each task carried a sense of purpose. The chores, which had once felt like survival, now became lessons in skill and independence. One afternoon, Clara and Thomas were walking toward the barn when Thomas stopped and looked out over the plains. His eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. "We need to make sure the animals are ready in case we have to move them," he said. "If the bandits get closer, we can't leave them behind. They're part of this place, part of what keeps us going." Clara nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. She felt a mixture of fear and determination. They had survived so much already. She would not allow fear to paralyze them. She would protect Ethan and help Thomas however she could. The next few days were filled with preparation. Clara learned to reinforce the doors with heavy planks. Ethan helped by gathering small supplies, stacking them carefully in a corner where they would be easy to carry if they ever needed to leave in a hurry. Thomas showed them how to keep watch at night, listening for distant noises, reading the wind and the movement of animals for signs of trouble. Despite the tension, there were moments of calm and beauty. One evening as the sun set behind distant hills, Clara watched Ethan run across the yard, laughing as he chased a stray chicken. For a moment she allowed herself to forget the bandits and simply breathe in the joy of the present. Thomas joined them, smiling as he leaned against the fence, quietly proud of how they had all adapted to life on the ranch. Yet the awareness of danger was never far from her mind. Clara realized that this part of survival was different from anything she had faced before. It wasn't just the hunger or exhaustion of the plains. It was the knowledge that there were people out there who could bring harm, and that their safety depended not just on strength but on vigilance, trust, and careful planning. One night as they sat by the fire after finishing the day's chores, Clara spoke quietly to Thomas. "Do you think they'll come here?" she asked. Her voice trembled slightly. Thomas shook his head, but his eyes were serious. "I don't know," he admitted. "We have done everything we can to be ready. That's all we can do. The rest is out of our hands." Ethan, sensing the tension, climbed into Clara's lap. "Mom, will we be okay?" he asked softly, looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. Clara hugged him tightly. "Yes, Ethan, we'll be okay. We have each other, and we have Thomas. We'll face whatever comes together." The days that followed were filled with a strange mixture of calm and alertness. Clara and Thomas continued their chores, taught Ethan new skills, and strengthened the fences and gates. Yet every so often, the wind would shift, carrying a distant sound that made them pause. A snapping branch, a howl of a coyote, or a shadow moving across the distant hills reminded them that the plains were vast, and that they were not the only ones who could be watching. Clara often reflected on the lessons of these days. She realized that courage was not about facing the world without fear, but about continuing despite it. It was about protecting those you loved, making smart decisions, and preparing for challenges before they arrived. She saw the same courage in Ethan, small and quiet, yet growing stronger each day. Thomas noticed the changes in them as well. He often commented on how Clara had become more confident, more capable, and how Ethan was learning quickly. "You two are doing well," he said one evening. "You're learning to trust yourselves as much as you trust me. That's important." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the plains in shades of orange and purple, Clara allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the journey they had taken, from endless wandering and fear to this small ranch where safety, work, and trust created a fragile but real sense of home. She thought about the bandits and the uncertainty still ahead, but she no longer felt paralyzed by it. She felt ready to face whatever might come. That night as they secured the house and prepared for sleep, Clara whispered to Ethan, "We're ready for anything, my love. No matter what happens, we'll face it together." Ethan hugged her tightly, the warmth of his small body and trust in her arms a reminder that courage and hope were strongest when shared. Clara lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch, the wind rustling through the grass, the distant calls of animals, and the steady breathing of her son. She felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to Thomas, and to Ethan. Life on the plains was not easy, and danger was never far, but they were learning to face it together. They were not just surviving. They were growing stronger, smarter, and braver each day. By the time the first light of dawn touched the plains, Clara felt a renewed determination. The bandits might come, the plains might test them, but they had found strength in each other. The trust, patience, and courage that had been cultivated on the ranch would guide them. They were ready for what lay ahead, prepared to face challenges with steady hearts and united spirits. The following days passed quietly, yet every shadow and sound reminded Clara and Thomas of the bandits' potential approach. The wind whispered across the plains like a warning, carrying with it the scent of dust and grass. But with each passing day, Clara felt her confidence growing. She had learned to read the land, to listen for subtle hints, and to trust Thomas's guidance. Most importantly, she had learned to trust herself and Ethan. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Ethan suddenly stopped and looked toward the distant hills. "Mom, do you see that?" he asked, pointing. Clara squinted, her heart skipping a beat. In the distance, a small cloud of dust moved slowly across the flat plains. She could not tell if it was a herd of animals or people, but instinct told her to be alert. Thomas appeared behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. He studied the movement carefully, his eyes narrowing. "Could be nothing," he said cautiously. "But it could also be them. We'll keep an eye and be ready just in case." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath. The lessons of the past weeks had prepared her for this moment. She moved quickly but calmly, guiding Ethan to the safety of the barn and checking the secured doors and windows. The boy's small hands trembled, but he trusted her and followed every instruction without hesitation. Hours passed, and the dust cloud in the distance slowly disappeared behind the hills. Clara's tension eased slightly, but she did not relax completely. The plains were unpredictable, and safety was never permanent. Yet, as she watched Ethan play quietly in the barnyard once more, she realized that even in uncertainty, life could still be full of small joys and victories. That evening, after ensuring that the house was secure and the animals were safe, the three of them sat together on the porch. The sky was painted with deep oranges and purples, and the air was calm, almost serene. Thomas broke the quiet with a soft voice. "You've both done well. You've learned to be cautious without fear, to work hard, and to care for each other. That's courage, real courage. Not the kind that makes stories, but the kind that keeps people alive." Clara felt a warmth in her chest. She looked at Ethan, who was now smiling genuinely, his earlier anxieties replaced by a quiet confidence. She realized how far they had come, not just in surviving the plains, but in learning to live, to hope, and to trust again. The next morning brought another clear sky and a gentle breeze. Clara and Thomas decided to take the animals out to graze in the nearby field while Ethan followed along, skipping between them with light steps. The air was fresh, the sun warm, and for a moment the vast plains no longer felt threatening. They had carved a small world of safety, a sanctuary that existed despite the dangers beyond. Midday arrived, and with it came a distant, rumbling sound. Clara froze, her heart hammering. Thomas's expression grew serious as he scanned the horizon. Dust clouds were rising again, larger this time, moving closer to the homestead. "This time it might be them," he said calmly but firmly. "We need to be ready." Clara felt fear rising, but it was tempered by resolve. She had been afraid before, but now she knew she had the strength and knowledge to protect her son. She moved quickly, guiding Ethan to the barn once more and checking that the animals were secure. Thomas followed, reinforcing the doors and keeping watch. Together, they worked like a single unit, each action deliberate, each decision careful. The dust clouds grew closer, and soon the shapes of several riders became visible in the distance. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but she held her ground, staying close to Ethan. Thomas whispered instructions, guiding them silently. The riders approached cautiously, and as they drew nearer, Clara could see that they were not there to cause harm. They were just travelers, moving along the plains like they had for miles. Relief washed over her, and she realized how much she had learned about patience, observation, and trust. After the moment of tension passed, Clara felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had faced the potential threat together, and nothing had been harmed. The experience strengthened her belief that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely despite it. She looked at Ethan, whose small face reflected awe and pride, and she realized that he too had learned this lesson. The days that followed were filled with continued work and small joys. Clara helped Thomas repair fences, tended to the garden, and learned new skills with quiet determination. Ethan explored the land with growing confidence, learning to care for animals and understanding the rhythms of life on the plains. Even in the shadow of possible danger, they discovered that life could be meaningful and joyful. One afternoon, as they sat together sharing a simple meal, Clara reflected on how far they had come. "Thomas," she said softly, "we came here seeking safety, but you've given us so much more. You've taught us courage, patience, and kindness. You've shown Ethan how to hope again, and you've reminded me that life can still be good." Thomas smiled, a warm and gentle expression that reflected years of experience and quiet wisdom. "I've learned from you both as well," he said. "You've reminded me that even when life is harsh, people can grow stronger together. That's what keeps the plains from feeling so empty." Ethan, listening quietly, leaned against Clara, his small hand in hers. "I like it here," he said simply, his eyes shining. "I feel safe. I feel happy." Clara hugged him tightly, feeling tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. For so long they had been alone, struggling to survive, and now they had found a place where hope could grow. The bond between them and Thomas had turned a house on the plains into a home. As evening fell, Clara stood on the porch and looked out over the land. The vast plains stretched endlessly, but they no longer seemed frightening. She knew that challenges would come, that life was never without struggle, but she also knew that they had the courage, knowledge, and support to face whatever lay ahead. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also taught them lessons that would last a lifetime. Lessons about trust, resilience, and the power of kindness. That night, as Clara tucked Ethan into bed, she whispered, "We made it, my love. We've made it through so much, and we'll keep going, together." Ethan smiled sleepily and hugged her, his small hand still holding the worn toy horse that had traveled with them from the plains. Clara lay awake for a while, listening to the soft sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cows, the gentle rustle of wind through the grass, and the quiet breathing of her son. She felt a profound sense of peace. They were no longer just survivors on the harsh plains. They were a small family bound by trust, courage, and love. Over the next few weeks, Clara, Ethan, and Thomas continued to work and live together in harmony. The ranch became a place of learning, growth, and hope. Clara and Ethan thrived in the safe environment, while Thomas found companionship and fulfillment in guiding them. They shared laughter, meals, and quiet evenings by the fire, and the bond between them deepened with each passing day. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the plains with soft light, Clara realized that they had transformed not only the ranch but themselves. They had learned the strength of trust, the importance of courage, and the joy of connection. The plains, which had once seemed so cruel and unforgiving, had become a place of growth and possibility. Clara and Ethan knew that challenges would come again, that the world beyond the fences might test them, but they no longer feared it. They had learned to face life with steady hearts, to rely on each other, and to embrace the kindness and guidance of those willing to help. Together, they had created a home where there had been none, a life where hope could flourish, and a future filled with the quiet strength that comes from shared love and courage. And so, as the sun climbed higher over the endless plains, Clara, Ethan, and Thomas stood together, looking out at the land that had tested them and, in the end, had given them a new beginning. They were not just surviving, they were living, learning, and thriving, bound together by the power of kindness, courage, and hope.